Welcome to General Biology. Today's presentation is going to be on primary and secondary succession. So primary succession is a situation where we start with bare rock. So how do things grow when we start with bare rock? And what causes bare rock to be exposed anyway? So a couple things that can cause bare rock to be exposed is when one plate pushes underneath another plate, it can force rock that was underground to come up and be exposed. This is how new mountain ranges form. That can cause bare rock to exist. Another situation would be if we have a volcanic eruption. You can get lava that erupts from the volcano, and as the lava hardens, cools and hardens, it becomes bare rock. Sometimes winds are so strong in certain areas, they blow all of the soil away and they just leave exposed rock. And sometimes when glaciers get so heavy that they actually push all the soil off from the rock that's underneath. And so when the glacier recedes, as it melts, it exposes bare rock underneath it. In all those situations, not much can grow on bare rock. So the thing that starts growing on bare rock the best is lichen. Lichen comes in different forms. Sometimes it's just small and kind of circular and flat to the rock. Sometimes it's a little poofier, like this reindeer moss. Sometimes it's scaly. But you can see it comes in a lot of different forms, and it can grow side by side with other plants as well. But it's definitely one of the things that grows initially on rocks and starts to break down and form soil in the cracks of rocks. So once soil starts being established in the cracks of the rocks, then other plants can start to grow. A lot of times those next plants to grow are moss type plants, moss and grasses. Moss is a plant that grows on the surface of the rock, and it produces more biomass than lichen, and it grows faster than lichen. And so once moss starts growing, it can speed up the accumulation of soil in those cracks of rocks and then along the edge of rocks. A lot of times you'll see moss growing on rocks that looks like this. It'll be growing on trees. It grows on all kinds of stuff, but it's kind of the second phase of getting things going. The next phase would be grasses. You don't need a whole lot of established soil to get grasses to grow. And you can see here's a grassland. Sometimes the final climax community is grassland, depending on the amount of rainfall and the temperature in a particular region. It might be what you end up as grasslands. But if there's more rain, a lot of times then you get shrubs in this process of succession. And shrubs eventually will lead to small kind of scrubby trees. Sometimes it'll stop here. This is kind of what we would think of as a chaparral. There's a lot of this type of environment out in California. But if you get even more rainfall, and it's enough rainfall to support large trees, eventually what you will get is the trees start to mature and you get a forest. This happens to be a temperate forest. Sometimes it'll be a temperate forest, sometimes pine forest. It depends on the conditions in the area where you are. Secondary succession is a little bit different than that. Secondary succession, you start with soil. So something happened to knock out all the wildlife. Maybe there was a big fire. Maybe a flood killed all the trees. Maybe a tornado came through and ripped all the trees out. But something happened to send you back to basically just land with soil. Now this is a little different. We don't have to establish soil now. So if we had any seeds that were there, they can start to grow right away. And actually some plants have like cones, they call them serotinous cones, that are filled with wax, and they won't actually open until they get super hot. So fires actually release the seeds. A lot of the pine trees out west have this type of situation. Lodgepole pines especially do this. So when you have a fire, what happens after a fire? Everything burns up and you end up with basically just burned ground. And the first thing that starts to grow afterwards is usually grasses. Grasses and small wildflowers will start to grow. But those trees have released their seeds. The serotinous cones have melted and released their seeds. And so you're going to start getting pine forests starting to grow where the pine forests were before. After 5 years or so, you'll see a bunch of little pine trees starting to grow. And pine trees can grow pretty fast. After 10 years, you're going to have a bunch of pine trees that look like Christmas trees. They'll be 6 or 7 feet tall. After 15 years, they'll grow to be 20 feet tall. After 30 years, they'll be 30 or 40 feet tall. And then after about 60 or 70 years, you have a mature forest again. And the lodgepole pines are up to their 75 to 100 feet tall. So that's secondary succession. It happens after a natural disaster that eliminates all the vegetation, but it leaves the soil. So primary starts with bare rock. Secondary, we have established soil, so it's going to go a lot faster. Primary could take thousands to hundreds of thousands to maybe even millions of years, depending on where you are on the planet. Secondary succession is much quicker. Probably the slowest secondary succession would be a tropical forest, just because they take a long time to become established, but even that would be 200 or 300 years.